Hello, I'm Craig Darpino from American Auto Wire. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use the single and double crimping tools. There are two tools we recommend when installing one of our harnesses. There's the 510-585 single crimp tool and the 510-586 double crimp tool. First, you'll notice the difference. This is the single crimper. This is the 510-585. This will do all of your smaller gauge terminals, and it's the one you'll use most of the way through the installation. This is the 510-586, which does the larger gauge terminals as well as the double wires into a single terminal. The first thing you notice right off the bat, physically they're different. The single crimp tool is tapered at the end, whereas the double crimp tool is kind of squared off at the end. When you look inside, you'll see the actual footprint of the jaws that do the crimp are smaller on the single crimp tool, and they are much larger on the double crimp tool. Here are the typical terminals you'll find throughout our Universal and Classic Update harnesses. This terminal here is used in our steering column and body connection harnesses. This is the male terminal. This is the real common female terminal you'll see throughout the kit in a lot of different instances. And this is a headlight terminal, which I'm going to show you in a little bit. This will actually accept two wires. We're going to start off with the most common crimp that you're going to use when installing one of our kits. It's the smaller female terminal here that is going to be used. We're going to be using the 14 gauge wire as an example. You'll notice I already have this wire stripped to the correct length to put it into the terminal and crimp it. A good way to check this if you're unsure is to actually hold it up to the terminal. You can kind of lay the wire in there. You'll see just a little bit of copper should be coming through this side here. You should have a small gap before the installation starts, and then the wings that'll crimp onto the installation. This is going to be the first crimp we're going to use. This is the higher of the two. This is the one closest to the outside of the tool. This is the smaller one, which will be the secondary crimp onto the copper of the wire. And what I like to do is you actually want to kind of stand over the tool when you're using it so you can get everything lined up correctly. And that way you can see how far in or out you have the wire. You don't want to push it all the way in or you'll grab the insulation and you won't have a proper crimp. But once you have that lined up, you give it the initial crimp. That'll hold it in place. And what I like about using the high side first is it allows you to make any adjustments you need without being completely crimped down. You can still kind of move that wire around to get it just right. Now you're going to come back with the low side crimp, which is, I'll show you again, it's this one here. This is the one we used initially. This is the one we're using now. You flip the tool over, just like that. You want to kind of eyeball it, get it centered in the tool. Give it a nice crimp. And that part of the crimp is done. Now we're ready to move on to the insulation crimp. For the insulation crimp, we're going to go back to the high side, which is the one closest to the outside of the tool. We're going to put the double hump side up top, line it up with the terminal. Again, you want to, like I said before, stand over top of it. Make sure it's centered. Give it a nice crimp. You see there, that is a nice crimp, and we are ready to install this in the car. Here we have the male terminal, which you'll find throughout the kit when we require you to make a disconnect, which is commonly used. And what makes this a little trickier than the female terminal is the metal is considerably thicker than the female terminal. And these little wings here at the bottom can make it a little more difficult to get a solid crimp. Now what I'm going to show you, when you go to line your wire up in this terminal, the same rules apply as far as the depth of the copper into the terminal. You have to be very conscious of these two tips right here, that you don't distort them with your crimper, because it's very easy to do. And there's also these two alignment tabs at the bottom that it's very easy to catch those in a crimper and really do some damage to the terminal before you get it actually crimped onto the wire. So we're going to put the wire in. Again, we're going to use the single crimper. And this one you want to perfectly line up over and this part here, you want to make sure that these two tabs on either side of this terminal are not inside the jaws of the crimper, or else you'll damage it and probably never get it installed in the connector. So we'll put our initial crimp on there. Again, that was using the high side outermost jaws, these here, to do the initial crimp. This will allow us to adjust the wire if we need to. Looks like it's pretty good. So we're going to move on to the inside or lower jaws on the crimper. Again, being careful not to hit those tabs. Like I said before, I like to stand right over the top of the tool to make sure it's perfectly lined up over those wings on the terminal to get them bent over properly. And that is the initial crimp on the wire. And that looks really good. This is the next part that is tricky. Like I mentioned before, there's these two alignment tabs that you don't want to interfere with when you're going to do your next crimp, which is the insulation crimp. The insulation crimp, as you know, we use the higher side jaws. We're going to get those lined up. Like I said, you want to get them as close as you can to those alignment tabs here and here, but you do not want to come in contact with those when you go to crimp down. And that looks pretty good. Everything's straight, everything's rolled over nice. We caught the copper, it looks very good. Now I'm going to show you how to properly crimp a double wire connection into a single terminal. This is a headlight terminal found at the front of the car in the headlight connection. And what you have to do there a lot of times is you'll have to double up the driver's side of the car to run the other wire over to feed the passenger side. This one you do your initial crimp once. You don't do two crimps on the copper and then a single crimp on the insulation. You do one crimp on the copper and that's it. So what you want to do first is obviously strip your wires to the correct length, which mine are already stripped. You want to get them lined up in the terminal. Get your crimping tool, and for this one we are going to use the inside, the one closest to the hinge, the smaller of the two jaws, to crimp down onto the copper. Again, with this, you want to look straight down at the tool. You want to get your terminal and wires lined up now. Give it the crimp. And there's the first crimp. Sometimes it can be tricky to get the two wires to sit side by side in the terminal. Sometimes it's a little tighter than others. This case, this is 14 gauge wire. It sits in there really nice. If you can't get them exactly side by side, don't get nervous. Get them as close as you can. When you go to crimp the insulation, you're going to do it pretty slow, and you'll see that when the wings of this terminal start to fold over, it'll actually grab the wires and kind of separate them. And you'll get to see that now when I crimp this. These are already kind of sitting side by side, so we're okay. But same thing here. This time we're going to use the outside jaws on the crimper. This is the insulation crimp. And in case you ever get confused, it's upside down, but they do label it insulation and conductor. Line this up with the wings on the terminal. Again, stand over it. Make sure that the terminal is centered in the tool. Everything looks good. Give it a nice crimp. There you have a factory crimp ready to install in the vehicle. Here are a couple examples I wanted to show you of the incorrect way to crimp wire. They had the right idea and they used the right crimper. However, on this one you can see crimped right over the insulation. There's no copper. They either forgot to strip it or it broke off, but when they clamped down on it, they grabbed all insulation, so that will not make contact. That's not a good crimp. The other side of that is they stripped off too much insulation, and this will work temporarily. What will eventually happen to this, you'll find that by not grabbing the insulation, it's very vulnerable in that spot. And just simple vibration in a car alone can cause this to break over time. So just keep that in mind. I emphasized before about the importance of getting the right amount of insulation stripped off, and you always want to eye it up to your terminal first before crimping for these very specific reasons, so you don't end up with a problem and you don't end up having to call the tech line later to figure it out. If you like this video, please be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching.